If you're here, you either loved Arcane or you have PTSD from playing League of Legends. Either way, I'm glad you came because I think this show is something worth talking about on a deeper level. In fact, we're going to dive into 3 levels of meaning hidden in Arcane. The stuff we're about to unpack might make you rethink things all the way down to the meaning of your everyday life decisions and all the way up to the meaning of reality itself. My name is Kyle J. Shower and welcome to the Kyle J. Show. Arcane is so good, and League of Legends must be just as good, right? It is! League of Legends is a great game. I gotta say, it's really changed my life for the better. If you've never played it, you should go download it right now. Seriously. Stop watching me and go download League of Legends. Okay, all jokes aside, League has the undisputed most toxic community in all of gaming. But if you can look past that, it is actually a good game. People love to hate, but Riot Games has become an innovative gaming empire and dominated the esports scene. Worlds has basically become the Super Bowl of gaming, and the production value is insane. The opening ceremony is so underrated. In my opinion, it is the greatest current live production event right under the Super Bowl halftime show. As any League or Valorant player will tell you, Riot is not perfect, but they have a commitment to quality that you have to respect. And they have absolutely shattered the standard of quality in animated television with Arcane. It's the most expensive animated TV show ever made with a budget of $250 million. And I'm not even mad at it. Worth. Between the unique and innovative animation styles, original music, incredible storytelling, I really believe this show to be a work of art unlike anything we've ever seen before. However, all that being said, I'm not a TV show critic, I'm a meaning critic. And the meaning of Arcane is about as good as it gets. We've got the Bhagavad Gita, we've got the Bible, and now we got Arcane. Broadly speaking, there are 3 levels of meaning that's communicated in every story. There's the individual level that offers meaning to us personally in our everyday lives. Then there's the collective level that offers meaning to society, things like our culture and politics. And then lastly, there's what I call the Mythos level, which offers meaning about reality itself. In my channel about the meaning of things, you can see these levels everywhere. My video on the bear emphasizes the Mythos level. My video on the boys emphasizes the collective level. And then my video on Doja Cat emphasizes the individual level. A good story will really shine and put an emphasis on one particular level. A great story can even hit 2 levels. But Arcane hits at every single level. And I'm gonna break it all down for you. If you're into philosophy and the meaning of life, start with part 1. If you're into culture and politics, jump to part 2. If you're into psychology and bettering yourself, go right on ahead to part 3. Or you can watch it all and see how everything connects and is woven together. This show is all about the decisions that we make as a human race, so choose wisely. I'm kidding, do whatever you want. I'm just happy you're here.
This conflict, this senseless waste. I know their minds. Chase. They want better lives, but emotion clashes with reason. Humanity's self-corrupting contradiction.
We start our journey at the very finale of the show, where Victor makes the claim that human nature is composed of a clash between emotion and reason that leads us to a self-corrupting contradiction. This is the philosophical notion that contradictions born out of the clash of opposing forces is a fundamental principle of reality. Now, this idea can be traced all the way back to the ancient philosophy of Heraclitus, about 500 years BCE. And before it was philosophically articulated, the experience was kind of obvious. From the very beginning of our existence, you can find this laid out conceptually in ancient myths and stories all over the world. In Egyptian myth, it's seen in the clash between Osiris and Set. In Mesopotamian myth, you have the clash between Marduk and Tiamat. In the Bible, it's seen in the story about the clash between Abel and Cain. Arcane is another one of these stories. The show places us into the heart of a city that illustrates the contradictory nature of reality through the divided societies of Piltover and Zaun. Their division is a symbol of the 2 opposing forces, order and chaos. Within those 2 categories basically holds all of life's contradictions, right? Things like reason and emotion, authority and anarchy, creation and destruction, objectivity and subjectivity. On into infinity. Piltover and Zaun is more than just a setting. It's a demonstration representation of the way our reality fundamentally works. At the highest overarching level, the Mythos level, Arcane is a show about the dialectics of chaos and order. Hey, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to thank you for being here, and if you would like, I would appreciate it if you took the time to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Since Heraclitus, philosophers have continued to philosophize and developed a method by which we can overcome contradiction known as dialectics. It's a process that involves 3 stages of development known as the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Can someone tell me why the we just changed the pronunciation? Let's have a little consistency. It should be thesis, antithesis, synthesis, or we could even do thesis, antithesis, synthesis. In this method, you first begin with some proposition called the thesis. Then someone or something comes along with the counter argument to your proposition, which is known as the antithesis. And finally, the two come together and form some resolution known as the synthesis. If we return to Arcane, we see this entire process exemplified in the setting alone. Piltover is the thesis. It's a representation of the established order. You can see its ideals illustrated in its very aesthetics. It's clean, it's bright, it has gold accents and buildings ascending into the heavens. It's known as the City of Progress for the ways in which it champions innovation, yet it contains its own ambition by doing so with structure and rigidity. On the other hand, Zaun is the antithesis. It's a representation of the chaos that challenges the established order. Its aesthetic is disheveled, it's dark, it's an uncontrolled environment whose rough exterior intensifies the deeper into the canyons you go. It bears this uninhibited creativity that is both its virtue and vice. It's a place where outcasts, rebels, and survivors come to find a home and pursue dreams of a better life. The conflict between Piltover and Zaun has its own particulars, but it can be taken up into the universal categories of order and chaos we experience and observe in multiple levels of our reality. Ecosystems go through a period of growth and beauty that clash with periods of death and decay. History is just a cycle of established empires clashing with another empire that challenges their authority. Technology clashes with your grandma when she has to upgrade from a pager to a flip phone to an iPhone. Honestly, our poor grandmas. All of these aspects of reality create these contradictions that we have to contend with on a daily basis. The contradiction born between the thesis of Piltover and the antithesis of Zaun drives the plot of the show, the same way the contradictions between order and chaos drive the plot of our lives. As the events unfold, we watch as each character attempts to do what each one of us does in life, resolve the contradictions, and try to find a synthesis. We can once again look to the setting of our story to find the concept of synthesis, symbolized in a part of the city known as the Bridge of Progress. That is the most fitting name that you could possibly come up with. Synthesis is progress, and the way you achieve that progress is by bridging the thesis and the antithesis. The physical purpose of the bridge to connect Piltover and Zaun illustrates the greater purpose of these two to connect on a deeper conceptual level. The beginning of the entire show, Season 1, Episode 1, is set at this very location. It opens up with a battle that had just taken place on the bridge. Vi and Powder, at a very young age, walk through the ruins, witnessing violence, death, and destruction. It's a traumatic setting that lays the groundwork for the characters and plot, but also sets the groundwork for where they're at in the dialectical process. On this day, no synthesis was found. Vander carries Vi and Powder back into Zaun, and the Enforcers retreat into Piltover, where the separation will continue for the next few years. We even find out at the end of the episode that at some point Vander strikes a deal with the Enforcers that keeps the people of Zaun out of Piltover and the people of Piltover out of Zaun.
We had a deal, Vander. You keep your people off my street, and I stay out of your business.
While it's well-intended, this secret treaty sustains the division and mutual neglect that has consequences. Consequences that the characters have to contend with for the rest of the story. But through it, we get an important insight into the nature of dialectics. Whether we like it or not, these opposing forces in reality depend on each other. The dialectical relationship is one where each force shapes and is shaped by the other. Ecosystems need things like wildfires to produce growth and new life. Our empires need to be overturned to prevent our natural tendency towards tyranny. Your grandma needs to know how to work an iPhone to leave you 5-minute voicemails.
Hello, sweetheart? Are you there? My doctor says I need celery. Do you still need those pills for your erectile dysfunction? Hello? sweetheart.
In Arcane, there's plenty examples of this, but none is better than the opposing forces of Hextech and Shimmer. These two technologies are a symbol of power for their respective societies, and when they're put out into the city, it has serious ramifications for both sides. In Piltover, Hextech is a power born out of the combination of magic and science. It was initially created with the good intention of helping everyone in the city, including Zaun. However, that never happened, and once its strength was realized, they debated even using it against them.
We flood the Undercity with enforcers, armed with Hextech.
With the power gap widening, Zaun needed to come up with some power of their own. So out of the laboratory of Singed came Shimmer, and that was taken up by Silco on a larger scale through mass production, distribution, and fighting back.
Shimmer, we have the power. We can finally realize our dream.
These powers came to be because of the other. Piltover trying to better a part of their city that was terribly neglected, and Zaun having to respond to the threat of any further abuse. With these two incredible powers looming over one another, each side had to take the other into serious consideration, and it explicitly guided their actions, not just within their own society, but towards one another. In other words, these powers shape and were shaped by the other. With these powers in hand, the stakes were insanely high. Without a resolution between these two societies, every moment increases the potential for disaster. However, these powers also have so much potential to be used for the sake of reaching a synthesis. Where they end up is in the hands of each character and how they choose to actualize their potential. In Season 2, Echo, Heimerdinger, and Jace team up in an attempt to solve the mystery of the corrupted Hex Core. In the middle of their investigation, they stumble upon an anomaly that sends them into something like an alternate universe. Each universe depicting the ideal best and the ideal worst potentialities for Piltover and Zaun. Echo and Heimerdinger are sent to one analogous to heaven, and Jace is sent to one analogous to hell.
My side's so much scarier than yours.
Oh shit, your trip sucks.
Some people didn't like this, because here comes another multiverse that's just gonna get abused and used as a get-out-of-jail-free card when their plot goes to shit sometime in a later spin-off. Now, I'm speculating, but I don't think this is a multiverse situation. The two universes are so extreme. There's no nuance. I mean, even Silco is a good guy.
Didn't you try to kill him?
Greatest thing we can do in life is find the power to forgive.
To me, it feels like there's some intentional magic at play here. I don't know, this might be copium, but I hope they go down that path rather than the multiverse path, which is a little stale at this point. Besides, the two universes are incredibly tailored to exactly what Echo and Jace needed to see. It gave each one the inspiration necessary to come back to their own universe and take the potential for synthesis and actualize it. On paper, dialectics might look like a nice method, only requiring a few easy steps to solve life's contradictions, but through the depiction of these two universes, we find another important truth about how complex this process really is. In reality, the synthesis that lies between the thesis and antithesis is not guaranteed. It's not a simple equation like 2 + 2 = 4. The synthesis is pure potentiality that can only come to be if we choose to actualize it. In Arcane, they even go out of their way to show us the Bridge of Progress, this symbol of synthesis in each of the alternate universes. In the universe Jace is sent to, the bridge is completely destroyed. In Echo's universe, however, the bridge has become a place where the people of Piltover and Zaun live in harmony. Their children are playing together, they're eating together, they're trading together. They've come to appreciate the value that each one brings to the table. One of the main reoccurring themes of the show is the struggle for us to actualize the path towards synthesis.
I used to dream the Undercity could be like this, but somewhere I got consumed by all the ways it wasn't. I gave up on it.
The two universes are an important reminder to Jace and Echo, and also to us as an audience, that every decision and action we make takes us either one step closer to heaven or one step closer to hell. In reality, probably the single largest way in which we collectively actualize our potential is through politics.
I never wanted anything to do with politics. You pushed this on me.
With that comes the potential to shape your own destiny.
Politics plays a major role in the story of Arcane, and a lot of it reflects the politics in our real world. This show happened to be released right in the heat of the American election, and it wasn't too hard to see the ways it paralleled it. Christian Link, the creator of this show, said, "If you're asking if we were inspired by two sides of a country that can't even talk to each other anymore, Yes, in some ways the show reflects real life. Here, not only is Christian Link connecting the show to the current state of politics in our reality, but also the current state of dialectics in our politics. The struggle to find synthesis is just as apparent in reality as it is in the show. As we move from analyzing the show on the mythos level to the collective level, we happen to follow right in step with the philosophical timeline of dialectics. About 100 years after Heraclitus laid the groundwork, Socrates and Plato came along and broadened the usage of this method into various disciplines, one of them being politics. Now, please understand that I'm going to be speaking at a very general level of politics. There are always going to be outliers and exceptions. That being said, most political systems typically consist of two conflicting ideologies where on one side you have conservatives and the other you have progressives. These political categories also fit into the fundamental categories of order and chaos. And to be clear, order and chaos does not mean good and bad. Both have their good and bad aspects. On the side of order, you have conservatives who are largely interested in keeping with tradition and maintaining the current status quo. Progressives would then be on the side of chaos, where they embrace change and challenge the way things are conventionally done. Once again, we can turn to Piltover and Zaun to see the dialectics of conservatism and progressivism. Order and chaos play itself out in real time. I have to say, it was nice to get a take of the political divide that paints the picture in its totality. In my opinion, the show provides a very fair and pretty unbiased depiction of the two sides. With so many stories today that are filled with a political agenda, it's refreshing to get one that comes with a more even, balanced approach. And listen, I'm not the type of guy who hates a story with a political message. People are always going to use stories to share what's meaningful to them, and I'm always going to respect that and genuinely engage to see where they're coming from. However, what Arcane does is pretty rare, and I think it's worth acknowledging and appreciating its uniqueness in this. In both societies of Piltover and Zaun, they show that there is good and there is bad. And before we get into pointing fingers at who's good and who's bad, on a meta-political level, they provide a pretty accurate depiction of the way conservatives and progressives naturally tend to operate. Piltover is run by a council consisting of some of the wealthiest and most powerful houses. Although they have their differences, they typically are willing to come together and unify under a majority rule for the sake of maintaining proper order.
In crises such as these, it's imperative you present a unified front to the public, whatever your personal feelings.
How wise.
Unfortunately, there's a natural tendency to maintain that order for the sake of their own self-preservation. They're incentivized to make sure things stay the way they currently are because they hold all the power the way things currently are. This is exemplified in Season 1, while during a play, Mel teaches Jace the game of politics in Piltover. She shows him that each of the council members' allegiance lies with whatever offers them the greatest amount of personal gain. Jace doesn't like this, but he deems it necessary for his cause, so he proceeds to strike deals with each member, offering them the power of Hextech in exchange for their support. Moving on to Zaun, where we see a very different dynamic within its leadership. Zaun is run by a group of people known as Chem Barons that largely consist of the crime lords who hold all the power in the Undercity. They tend to struggle finding unity in the midst of all the chaotic confluence of differing ideologies. They've identified so deeply with these ideologies that anyone who isn't for them is against them. As far as they're concerned, everyone else is just as much of an enemy as the society that has declared literal war against them.
Our best shot is to put aside these petty squabbles and join forces.
Ally with these two? I rather favor my chances with topside.
However, their identity tends to be rooted in a cause that is greater than themselves. Each particular faction is representative of a very real and true inequality or injustice that has affected their society. Their passionate devotion to their ideology is founded in the hope of creating a better world. So that's my political overview of Piltover and Zaun and how their dynamics happen to look much like our political reality. Please understand, I am not equating the positive or negative characterizations of Piltover and Zaun to conservatives and progressives. I'm just giving an overview of the way these political ideologies tend to operate. Conservatives tend to unite despite their differences, while the differences between progressives tend to create division within their own party. Conservatives tend to fight for their own self-interest, while progressives tend to fight for some greater societal inequality or injustice. Alright, now that I've cleared that up, I'm sure you're all perfectly satisfied with the ways I so eloquently generalize conservatives and progressives. You, the internet, are so kind, so generous, so open-minded that I'm sure I'll hear nothing about this part of the video in the comments. Listen, I hear all the arguments in my head about the different exceptions and outliers to this, so I hear where you're coming from. And I do want to address one particular argument that you might already be typing away as I speak. That is the discrepancy between the fact that the show has Piltover labeled as the city of progress, yet I'm claiming that Piltover represents conservatism and not progressivism. There you go. First of all, this is a self-acclaimed title that I think was intended by the writers to have somewhat of an irony. Their ideals are largely rooted in technological advancement rather than actual progress for the general public. They aren't really pushing for new ideas, they're pushing for the ideas that help them further their already established ideas. We see in the show that all the advancement Piltover makes ends up benefiting themselves and not the entire city. It's a one-sided false progress. As we've discussed, true progress is found in the synthesis, where two sides come together and push the entire course of humanity towards a more universal, greater good. However, now we can really begin to see the complexities of creating a path towards synthesis. From the analysis I just gave, you can see that these two political ideologies significantly differ on what the greater good is and how we should go about achieving it. In other words, the two differ on their ideas of what our potential is and how we should actualize that potential. This is the conflict that has set the game of politics in motion since the beginning of time. No two people have the exact same idea of what our potentiality should look like and how to actualize it. In reality, each person has their own idea of what the path to synthesis should look like, and the same is true for our characters in Arcane. We've looked at the political division at a high level, but within those two large general categories is an entire spectrum with a whole list of other general categories. So let's get slightly more particular, but once again, not too particular just yet. While each character is fairly nuanced and changes as the story unfolds, they all have their general place in which they fall on the political spectrum. And they actually do a pretty decent job at representing our real-life political ideologies. In no particular order, Vi would be your typical progressive revolutionary. She rebels against oppressive systems and favors an approach that's action-oriented rather than diplomatic. Then Vander is a progressive pragmatist. At least where we meet him at in the story. As opposed to Vi, he takes a more diplomatic approach to bringing change and prioritizes peace and protection of his people above all else. Silco is a progressive authoritarian who will make all the necessary sacrifices in order to institute the independence of Zaun, with him of course at the helm. Then you got Ambessa, who is a conservative authoritarian. She will make all the necessary sacrifices to ensure she maintains the power she currently holds. Belle would be a conservative pragmatist. With her upbringing, she's become a fox. My boy Jace!
Ooh, baby.
She's become a fox that's mastered the game of houses in the upper city. She seeks to achieve her ideals through the strategic use of power and influence. Heimerdinger is a conservative idealist. He has a good heart that truly seeks innovation and advancement for the sake of all. However, he's old as f***. All of his years has made him very risk-adverse and encourages a very slow transition from the current order into new ones.
But give it a decade of careful research, and it will be ready.
A decade? We can be improving lives with hex tech now.
Victor, on the flip side, is a progressive idealist. And at the end, he has very strong idealism. He was born in the trenches of Zaun, and all the pain and suffering he saw and experienced motivates him to make change happen now. Isha is dead. She's dead. She's not coming back. You can't be in politics if you're dead. Caitlyn goes through a lot of change and growth, but I would generally categorize her as a conservative reformist. She has a deep respect for authority and is dedicated to upholding the law, but looks to change it from within to ensure justice is dispersed equally. Echo is hard to label. He's like a revolutionary, but a different kind. He doesn't really want to take part in any of the political games, so he forges his own path through his commune. So yeah, I don't know, maybe like an anarcho-revolutionary? Jinx, on the other hand, is a true anarchist. Though she grows in Season 2, for the most part, she wants nothing to do with politics and just wants to watch it all burn.
Watch it all burn.
Lastly, we have Jace. And I know I said this wasn't in any particular order, but I did want to leave Jace for last because there's a bit more I want to dive into with him. Now, politically, I would place Jace as your typical centrist. He truly desires the greater good of all the city, both Piltover and Zaun. And he even recognizes and appreciates the potential for synthesis in almost every political ideology. However, like most centrists in real life, this political fluidness makes him a victim to the self-corrupting contradiction of his own emotion and reason. In Season 1, to me, he was one of the most frustrating characters to watch. He kept jumping from one political ideology to the next. At the beginning, he takes up conservative idealism when he takes Heimerdinger's advice to shut down his Hextech research. Then Victor comes along and convinces him to be a progressive idealist. He reignites his work on Hextech for the sake of creating a better world. Once he gets a seat on the council, he takes up Caitlyn's reformism to try and make the necessary change from within. But that doesn't last long when Mel comes and entices him towards conservative pragmatism. My boy Jace!
Ooh, baby.
Which eventually leads him to betraying Heimerdinger.
I believe it's time we gave the beloved founder of our city a well-deserved retirement.
Jace, don't do this.
Ambessa then comes along, and you can see where Mel gets it in more ways than one. He takes up her conservative authoritarianism, setting up strict borders and intense means of control. He then teams up with Vi as a revolutionary to take down the oppressive authoritarianism of Silco. That wakes him up a little bit, and at the end of the season, he comes back to where the show all began in Vander's pragmatism. I know he never met Vander, but the same ideology is there when he tries to approach Silco diplomatically and offer a peace treaty between the two societies. Bro was all over the fucking map. We watch him waver from one ideology to the next and continually make wrong decision after wrong decision. He's on a genuine and noble quest to find which ideology holds the answer of the ultimate, absolute potential we should be striving for. But along the way, he finds that each one falls short. In the failure of Jace's pursuits, we begin to see the central meaning of Arcane and the main conflict between humanity and the pursuit of the final, glorious evolution. If you played League of Legends, and if you also happened to main the champion Victor, then you knew all along that he was going to end up being a bad guy. When you lock in the champion for the game, he has a voice line that says, "Join the glorious evolution." The writers use this concept of a glorious evolution as a fundamental idea behind the philosophy that turns Victor into a villain. We get a glimpse into this concept in Season 2, Episode 6, in a conversation between Victor and Singed.
Do you believe in fate, Doctor?
Not fate, evolution. Nature's greatest force, forever in flux.
No. Evolution has a destination, not to combat nature, but to supersede it. The final, glorious evolution.
In response to a question about fate, Singe says that he believes in evolution, which is forever in flux. And that's an important word for later, so hold on to it. Victor disagrees and says that evolution is not forever in flux, but it has an ultimate destination, which he calls the final, glorious evolution. In the basic outline of Dialectics, it makes it seem like the synthesis is actually what Victor is talking about here. The synthesis is the last step of the process. It's the final resolution of the contradiction between the thesis and the antithesis. And if we're being honest, when this process plays itself out in reality, this is how we view the idea of synthesis that we have in our minds. We think our means of resolution will actually solve the problem for good. I mean, think about all those political ideologies we just went through. The revolutionary, the idealist, the reformist, and all the others. Each one believes that their solution to our problem is the solution. Of course, we don't just do this at the collective level, we also do this at the individual level. We all think our way of doing things is the correct way to do things. Plenty of studies have shown that as humans, we have a little bit of a tendency to overinflate the amount that we think we know. Our decisions at the individual level are constantly tempered through the dialectics of the known and the unknown. Once again, this of course is just another subset of the dialectics of chaos and order, which is a fundamental principle of reality. There is plenty to talk about when it comes to what we know and don't know externally in the world around us. However, I want to focus on what we know and don't know internally, the known and unknown parts of ourselves. We're finally getting particular, and our individual internal cognition is about as particular as I can get without knowing you personally. If you've ever been in a relationship, you know that one of the most difficult parts of loving someone is figuring out what they want to eat. They come to you and say, "I'm hungry." So you say, "Oh, okay, what do you want to eat?" They say, "Oh, well, anything." So you say, "Okay, well, how about McDonald's?" And they say, "No, I don't really want that." So you say, "You just said anything!" And now because you yelled and used some derogatory language, you proceed to argue for the next 3 hours, getting hungrier, angrier, hangrier by the moment. And now, 2 weeks later, you're divorced, all alone playing League of Legends. God damn it! Nothing's going right today! You could have avoided all of this if you just took a big step back, took a big deep breath, and understood the internal dialectics of the known and unknown that goes on within every human being. Let's analyze the situation. Your significant other initially recognizes that within themselves, they're hungry and therefore desire food. Right now, they only know this part of themselves that's screaming, me hungry, me hungry. So they tell you that they'll take anything. When you then proceed to give them an option that falls within the category of anything, they realize that there was another part of themselves that they didn't see before. A part that was unknown. This new part of them doesn't desire just any food, but a certain kind of food. And as much as you want to be frustrated by this, it's actually pretty fucking reasonable. Most people don't eat the same food for every meal. We weren't even biologically designed to do that. So the fact that all of a sudden they have a particular craving is of no fault of their own, especially since that part wasn't even known until you brought up McDonald's and they realized it. And now all these unknown parts of themselves just start popping up all over the place. One part might desire to be nutritious, another part financially conscious. Another part has a particular craving. And then you gotta dive into the unknown to find out what that craving might even be. You see, in every decision we make, we have to constantly traverse the known and unknown parts of ourselves. It might be weird to think of the mind as having different parts, and even different parts that you aren't even aware of. Some psychologists have tried to help people grasp this idea by explaining it as if we have these different characters with their own personalities that come up and influence our behavior. You know, it's kind of like the movie Inside Out. Now, in reality, it's much more complicated than 4 or 8 emotions controlling your mind, but it's still a good example. There are actual practices like Gestalt therapy, internal family systems, or Carl Jung's active imagination that involve getting people to have imaginal conversations with these characters to help understand them better. Honestly, it's not for everybody, but there's plenty of people that have found this to be very helpful. Carl Jung and many of his predecessors have especially taken up this idea and laid out character archetypes. They identified characters with specific personalities found in a wide variety of stories all around the world. People have taken this and created these general categories of personality to which we all fall into. In fact, you could fit each character of Arcane into an archetype. The same way we fit each character into a general political category, they also fit into a general personality category. I just released a whole video on the trickster archetype through an analysis of the character Joker. And if you didn't pick up on it, Jinx and the Joker have an insane amount in common. You've probably encountered these personality categories in things like astrology, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, or any personality quiz you've ever taken on BuzzFeed. I don't know this, but I can guarantee that they have a quiz that tells you what Arcane character you are. Now, the problem with these tools that tell you what personality archetype you are is not their content, but how we interpret the content. A lot of people see their results and take them as an end-all be-all. It's like BuzzFeed told you that your Harry Potter house is Hufflepuff, and now you identify with Hufflepuff as it has ultimately defined who you are as an individual. We interpret these tests as if they're providing us with our fixed, final identity. Jung is rolling in his grave seeing his ideas corrupted this way. He adamantly argued against static approaches to our personalities because that's not how he believed people work. I'd like to reframe the way we think of this and understand that all the character archetypes are within every single one of us as a potential waiting to be actualized. Now, don't get me wrong, these personality tests can be a great place to start to help you understand your current tendencies and current personality traits. But the goal is not to find your identity in a single archetype. It should be the first step of your journey into the unknowns of your psyche to discover all the different parts of who you are. If we take this idea into Arcane and look at all the characters as different parts of our psyche waiting to be discovered, we can finally bring it all back to Jace. Earlier, we discussed the way Jace explored various political ideologies held by different characters. But from a psychological perspective, through each character, Jace was exploring a new part of himself. He had some issues, and we'll get into that. But his ability to not get locked into any one way of thinking or one particular identity is his redeeming trait. He realized that in every decision he made, what he knew wasn't enough.
My recent unsanctioned activities in the underground have shown me 2 things. I'm not fit to govern the people who live there, and neither are you.
There was more to it, and it was worth acknowledging and exploring the unknowns. And in each new idea he explored, he came to know different parts of reality and different parts of himself. Each part has a different perspective, temperament, ability, strength, weakness. He became a more well-rounded, capable individual. As he expanded himself, he expanded his potential. Through Jace, Arcane is trying to get us to realize the need for us to expand the potential in our own lives. Now, don't confuse this as just some nice little self-help talk to get you promoted at work. The show depicts the fact that it is our duty to explore the unknown and make ourselves more capable individuals, because when we don't, the consequences are detrimental. Unfortunately, the people of Piltover and Zaun had to learn this the hard way. Victor manages to gain enough power to actualize his idea of the ultimate solution to all of reality's contradictions through the final glorious evolution. Let's be honest, if any one of them had as much power as he did, they would do the exact same thing. His strength was given to him through combining Hextech and Shimmer, the two raw powers of Piltover and Zaun. With it, he can now literally unify the entire world and rid us of all pain and suffering.
Do you see the sublime intersection of order and chaos?
Victor embodies the ultimate synthesis of order and chaos, and that's what we want, right? So what went wrong here? To answer that, we have to make one last return to Dialectics and continue down the philosophical timeline all the way to the 1800s to a guy named George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. If you were already familiar with Dialectics, then you probably were familiar with Hegel, and you might have been even confused and frustrated as to why I haven't mentioned his name yet. He is the guy that most people think of when we talk about dialectics and philosophy. However, fun fact, he refused to use the terms thesis, antithesis, synthesis. I like to think that he felt my disdain for its inconsistent pronunciations. Yes, I know he spoke German. Hegel saw the three-step method as far too linear, and even referred to it as a lifeless schema. We can kind of see where he's coming from, since we've already seen the ways this method is far more complex when it plays itself out in reality. That was a big part of Hegel's problem with it, and he especially criticized the way people understood the synthesis and what that looks like when we try to actualize it in reality. He went all the way back to our boy Heraclitus and pointed out his notion that life is flux. See, remember that word?
Evolution, nature's greatest force, forever in flux.
The core idea is this notion that reality itself is in a constant state of change, a constant state of flux. This is exactly what Singed is saying when he refers to evolution as this biological system where organisms and the environment are constantly evolving. So in this particular instance, in an odd moment of convergence, the philosophies of Singed and Hegel are in agreement. Hegel thought we needed to include this idea of flux into the dialectical method. The way I'm about to phrase this would not be approved by Hegel, so Hegelians, please forgive me, but I think this still gets the point across. The synthesis is not the final step. In fact, there is no final step. To Hegel, once we find a synthesis, that synthesis just gets turned into another thesis, to which another antithesis comes along and another synthesis is born, and it just keeps going and going into infinity. To Hegel, reality is this process that has no end. The last insight into dialectics we get in Arcane is the concluding message that there is no final glorious evolution. This and everything else we've learned about dialectics is neatly wrapped up in the final confrontation between Jace and Victor.
You've always wanted to cure what you thought were weaknesses. Your leg, your disease, but you were never broken, Victor. There is beauty in imperfections. They made you who you are.
There is beauty in imperfection. We need the thesis and antithesis. These opposing forces are dependent on each other and make us who we are.
I thought I wanted us to give magic to the world. Now, all I want is my partner back.
There was so much potential in giving magic to the world, from the ideal best to the ideal worst outcomes. And the ideal worst was the loss of humanity itself, and for Jace, he saw the loss of humanity embodied in Victor and what he'd become. The last insight is actually given to us by Victor himself.
I thought I could bring an end to the world's suffering, but when every equation was solved, all that remained were fields of dreamless solitude. There is no prize to perfection, only an end to pursuit.
The conclusion that this version of Victor has come to is reminiscent of Hegel when he called our idea of dialectics a lifeless schema. The meaning of life is not to find some ultimate synthesis that saves us from the suffering of contradiction after contradiction. Arcane offers to us that the meaning of life is not found in achieving perfection, but the pursuit of perfection. In Arcane, Jace intuitively picked up on this as he was exploring different political ideologies and different parts of himself, only to find that none of them on their own were sufficient. He recognized that each one did have value, but not ultimate value. Unfortunately, he realized this through a lot of trial and error, and really just error. Jace was virtuous in his commitment to expanding his potential, a virtue that Victor lacked and eventually brought him to his downfall. However, through the whole story, Jace was as deeply flawed as everyone else when it came to actualizing his potential. He didn't really get his shit together until the very end. Before that was just a series of mistake after mistake. But through his flawed journey to becoming the eventual hero that saves everyone, I believe we see one of the central takeaways takeaways. I want to conclude with an implicit meaning that's layered throughout the entire story of Arcane. What Jace lacked is what I would call some good old-fashioned wisdom. It's great if you can do what we're talking about here and come to know all these different parts of yourself and reality itself, but all of that is meaningless if you don't know how to use those parts appropriately. Wisdom enables you not only to see the value in each part, but to know how to apply those parts. Reality is infinitely in flux, therefore we have to have the ability to adapt and be in alignment with that flux. Every situation is different and requires using different parts for different solutions. Some moments might require you to harness the power of the revolutionary. Others might require the power of the conservative idealist. And even some might require the power of the anarchist. Jace lacked wisdom and therefore didn't apply the different parts appropriately. He was both emotionally and rationally consumed by the ultimacy of whatever or whoever was right in front of him. Jace needed to cultivate wisdom. We need to cultivate wisdom. And maybe we could start to nominate people for president who have wisdom. That would be nice. Our world has never been more connected to share wisdom with one another, but you have to be intentional about seeking it out. There are so many good books, YouTubers, TV shows at your disposal, and as you learn, take it and test it in reality. Explore all the different parts of who you are, and in each situation, see what works and what doesn't. To an extent, we all have to be like Jason, go through a degree of trial and error. The central meaning of Arcane is that our personality has no ultimate identity. Our politics has no ultimate solution. Our reality has no ultimate synthesis. We are forever in flux, and it is our duty to expand our potential by exploring the unknown and appropriately actualize it by cultivating wisdom. You have no final glorious evolution. You are a vessel that can be infinitely poured into and infinitely poured out. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you next time.